This is Tim.
And Brandon.
This is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics, sponsored by ComicsNow.com. Brandon is on for the first time in several months. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm always here, but of course, I've told you and Malele before, like, you're welcome, like, if the spirit moves you to do a podcast without me, but you've never done it, so.
Yeah. You're like the glue that binds us, so I can't bring myself to do my own podcast.
Okay. I've been doing a lot of interviews lately. I don't know if you've listened to them at all, but speaking of interviews, the last time we talked was when we reviewed the Matt Sility book, Homeless Channel,
right? Which
turned out to be. It turned out that insulting him was the best move I ever made on this podcast.
Yeah, see, that's what we need to keep doing. I'm just going to, insult every comics creator out there, and then we'll get interviews with everyone.
Yeah, well, I mean, he wrote to me, and I interviewed him, and then the past two episodes, I've interviewed people that he referred me to. So, and what I'm discovering is that there's a thriving comics creator scene in San Francisco.
Okay.
So I may be
Which is where Alt Planetar, the comics publishing company, is centered?
AIT Planet Lar is in San Francisco, yes.
Okay.
And so, of course, a lot of these people are being published by them. Although, this colorist that he hooked me up with, Brian Miller, he's based in Arizona, and he's done coloring for Marvel and DC.
Okay.
So, a lot of industry cred there, I guess. But yeah, so I talked to a colorist because I wanted to get kind of that viewpoint. We hadn't really... Well, you and I did one show about coloring once quite a while ago, but other than that, we never really talked about that aspect of comics.
I used to bring it up every once in a while on the podcast.
Yeah.
That was just a little sidebar.
And we reviewed the DC book on coloring and lettering, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Anyway, so we got several things to talk about here. Should we do Pyongyang first?
That's fine.
I just haven't figured out how to pronounce this guy's last name. Delisle, maybe. There's an S in it that might be silent or it might not. It could be Delisle. I'm not sure. But he apparently actually visited North Korea to do some animation work, of all things, and did this graphic novel about his experiences there. And it was really interesting, but I think what made this book particularly digestible was that the art style was pretty cartoony. I think if it had been done in a more realistic style, it would have been kind of harder to deal with. I mean, I think if I were in a bookstore looking and I found a book about a graphic novel about North Korea that was all done in a very realistic style, it might not appeal to me because it's kind of a heavy topic. Because we know that it's the Hermit Kingdom, and people are fed all kinds of misinformation there, and the U.S. started the Korean War and so forth, and so it might just seem too heavy, I think, if it were in a more realistic style. But it's
kind of what we said about Mouse.
Yeah, exactly. It's the Mouse thing all over again. But it's cartoony, and then there are some humorous parts to it also. So, I mean, and it does get serious at times too, but it's kind of leveled out by the art and the humor in it.
It's written in kind of a journal form,
to
where it's just day by day his observations of what's going on in North Korea. And I really liked it because he didn't just leave it with the journal form of it with his impressions of the country, but he also backed it up with some kind of information that seemed, some data that seemed like he researched what actually was going on in the country.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like one section where he's talking about how much rice each person gets.
Mm-hmm.
Do you recall what page that was on?
No, I don't. And what's more, the pages aren't numbered, are they? Oh, I guess they are. There are numbers kind of stuffed in between the panels.
That's right, it is, huh? Which is different.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe he was afraid they were going to get cut off otherwise or something.
I remember it was on the right side of the page, but I don't remember
that
page.
narrows it down to half the book.
Exactly. That photographic memory works for me every once in a while. Now watch, it's going to be on the left-hand side.
Probably. What, something about rice?
Yeah, it went through like the productive members of Korea, how much rice they get, and then the dissidents and the general public who didn't contribute to the society, how they were just kind of left on their own. I'm flipping through it. I'm trying to find it now. There it is. It is on the right-hand side of the page. 47.
47.
It says a national public distribution system gives citizens portions based on their loyalty and usefulness to the regime. The useful population to include the core, and they got a big old bag of rice. The party cadres and army officers, they get the most rice. The lukewarm, it's a little bowl of rice. Those are the skilled workers, soldiers, and diplomats. And the Pyongyang residents. And the hostile, they get 250 grams a day. The children of dissident parents, political prisoners, approximately 200,000, and the laborers. Equivalent to half the portion distributed to the UN in refugee camps elsewhere in the world. And then finally, an additional 5 to 6 million individuals ignored by the regime are left to fend for themselves.
Wow. Yeah. Then
so yeah, I like that he actually seemed to do some kind of research to back up what he was saying.
Even points out that things that were being sent to North Korea were being diverted away from those people.
Right. The ones that needed it the most.
What I had a little trouble grasping about the structure of the book was that these full-page panels were meant to be kind of like beginnings of chapters. But it took me a little while to kind of get that.
Okay.
Like I was kind of like halfway through the book, like, oh, okay, those are like the beginnings of chapters.
Yeah, I saw it as a break. I don't know if I equivalated that to a chapter break, but I guess I did, kind of subconscious.
Kind of works, kind of functions that way. But yeah, I didn't quite get that at first. It just felt like the story was flowing right through there almost. But anyway, this was really good. I would recommend it.
Yeah, I was really impressed with this book. I thought this was one of the better books that we had read. And who's it from?
Drawn and Quarterly.
Okay. Drawn and Quarterly seems to be a pretty reputable comic book company, but I haven't read too much from them.
Yeah,
but I was just really impressed with the overall presentation. Did you have anything to say about the storytelling?
The storytelling, did you have anything in particular in mind? Or
well, we could break it down to the MacLeod, those different methods of telling the story. I think he mostly uses, moment to moment. And he does a pretty good job of it. I didn't have any problems reading it. It was a pretty quick read for me because it was really interesting and the storytelling didn't get in the way. So overall, I think, well, knowing that he's an animator probably gives him an advantage. But
yeah, true.
Overall, I think it was just outstanding storytelling overall.
Those periodic bits of like, can you find the vile anti-party element in this picture?
Yeah, I really like that. That was cool.
There's no way that someone who doesn't know North Korea would be able to pick him out, and maybe even somebody who does, because it's just maybe something that you can't visually pick out.
He's not wearing his pin.
Yeah.
right? That kind of thing.
Right. That was one of the easier ones. He's not wearing his Kim Jong Il pin. Um,
I'm looking at page 152. Among these valorous citizens lurk conspirators who seek to destabilize our glorious nation. Can you spot the traitors? And they all have a pin.
Mm-hmm.
You have to turn it upside down. Number 1, because he left the portrait of our dear leader to gather dust. And because 3 and 4, because they were enthusiastic enough to at the last demonstration. And 5 and 7, because their grandfathers fought with Southerners in 1951.
So, everybody.
And there is no number 6, so I mean, pretty much that's everybody, right?
Yeah, 6 and 2 have been eliminated already in previous installments. I'm looking at 92, where number 2 is the traitor because his badge is smudged and he doesn't have a handkerchief to clean it.
Right. It's pretty scary, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I mean, I imagine he's not just making those up. So, yeah, it's kind of chilling when you think about it.
Right. And then the other guy was reading 1984.
Oh, no.
No, he had lent the book to somebody else,
Uh-huh.
to a Korean guy who refused to say that anything was good about that book. And he kept saying, I'll give it right back to you. I'm done with it. I don't need it. But, yeah, I would guess that it relates pretty closely to that book, 1984.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I haven't read it. I saw the movie.
Ah.
Did you see the movie?
No.
No. But you probably read the book, right?
Actually, no, I don't think I ever did. I read Animal Farm, but...
Okay. By the same author?
Yeah. Orwell.
Yeah. Well, that was quick.
Yeah. Shall we move on to the DVD?
Sure.
Justice League: The New Frontier. Brandon said he wanted to talk about this, so I managed to borrow a copy from Cassie's husband.
Actually watched one of the movies.
I actually put a DVD into my computer and watched it.
So overall, what did you think?
I had good and bad to say about it, I guess. I mean, the story was exciting, but there were some aspects that kind of kept making me kind of question it somehow, or say like, this could have been better, or I don't know.
Okay.
Now I guess that this is based on a comic series. I mean, the story was in a comic before.
Right.
What was the guy's name? Darwin Cook. They mention him on iFanboy a lot. He just recently did a Spirit series. And what I found kind of odd was that some of the Justice League members were barely even there. Like Green Arrow, he's just kind of physically present, but he doesn't really function as a useful character.
But do you know why they did that?
Why?
Because there was a core 7 characters, the Justice League. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you watched the extras. You probably didn't, right?
I didn't take the time.
The movie itself?
Yeah.
So the extras goes into the explanation of why Darwin Cook chose those core 7 characters. Those are the core 7 characters that held the Justice Society, I think they called it originally, through the golden age of comics, and then kind of carried them into the Silver Age, and then they were ignored for a little bit in the Bronze Age. But he thought the 7 characters were those essential characters that made the Justice League, to include Superman, the Green Lantern, Wonder Woman, the Flash. Who else did they have? Martian Manhunter and
Batman.
Batman. So we're missing one. Who's left?
Well, just looking at the cover, I don't see anybody else who really had much to do in this story. Aquaman was there just a tiny bit, and a couple other people who I don't even know what their names are because I don't read DC.
I don't read DC all that much either. Oh, it was Atom Man. So those were the core 7 characters that brought them through the Golden Age, and he thought that it was important. It kind of, when you watch it, I wouldn't say that it reads chronologically, but you watch it and it plays out chronologically as far as the addition of additional. It's redundant. The addition of members as it goes along, as well as the changes to the characters that occurred during those decades that the Golden Age, Silver Age, and Bronze Age occurred.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the significant character changes was with Batman. Initially, he was a pretty scary character, and they kind of give some explanation as to why he took on the lighter character that we're all used to from the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
But there were these core 7 characters that he wanted to include. The other characters that came along later, like Aquaman and Green Arrow, they were significant, but they weren't central to the core Justice League story. So that was Darwin's explanation as to why he included the characters that he had chosen originally. He also said originally that, well, not just him, but they had a couple of different comic book experts. They came on, they talked about the golden age of comics and the Justice Society, how they had some core members that really chose not to show up in the book.
Mm-hmm.
Superman and Batman being the 2 major members that were, they were a part of the society, but they were too busy doing their own thing.
Mm-hmm.
But the whole draw to the Justice League or Justice Society at the time was that you have a book where you have all the cool characters in the DC universe all at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And you get to save money because you don't just simply buy an individual book with one character. They all kind of interact in this one title.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was kind of the start of the whole crossover thing that occurs in Marvel and DC, probably any other comic book universe.
Well, yeah, Avengers or what have you.
What really surprised me was that on the extras they actually had Stan Lee.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it surprised me because it's a DC movie, and they have Stan Lee talking about Marvel and DC. Because pretty much what Stan Lee was saying was DC came up with these ideas first. And then whoever the editor at the time was, who would talk to the DC editor, they were good friends. They would come back and he would tell Stanley, well, they're doing this team book and it's selling a lot. So we need to start a team book. So he invented the Fantastic Four. Which was kind of something I would never expect to hear, at least like 10 years ago. Because there was so much, it seemed like animosity between DC and Marvel. That Marvel would never admit that they were basing any decisions on what DC was doing successfully. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But, of course, Stan Lee now is kind of on his own, so he's not really representing Marvel.
Right.
He's got his own company to take care of. And I think he's a little more free to speak his mind on these issues. But that would be why we only see a glimpse of those characters, those secondary characters, coming into play during the movie instead of those essential core 7 characters being Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman, Green Lantern, Martian Manhunter, the Atom, and the Flash.
I don't remember seeing the Atom.
The Atom is the guy in the red shirt with he's got a white bandolier that goes across his chest. I don't know how else to call it. You don't really see him very much, but his character changed during the Golden Age and the Silver Age.
He's the guy with he has kind of a jetpack on his back?
Yeah, he's got a jetpack and a ray gun.
Okay.
And it seemed like his character was probably based more off of Flash Gordon than anything initially. But then when the Silver Age came around, the Silver Age being a time where they took the Golden Age character and tried to give a scientific explanation to each of them, they made the Atom a guy who could shrink down, kind of like Ant-Man. But he could shrink down to the size of an atom. And he was always smaller than the other characters in the comic books. Where in the original iteration of the character, he had some kind of a ray gun and he flew around like everybody else with the jetpack.
This cartoon had kind of a strange feel to it to me because I mean, the content was some of it, really not for kids, but it still had sort of the feeling that it was aimed at kids. Or maybe it was just that the voice acting didn't seem very good to me.
Oh, really? I thought it was maybe the animation that would have made you think that it was.
Well, there's that. There was that too. I mean, it was not much different from kids' TV animation in terms of the animation style.
And I really kind of like that because it harkened to that more innocent age of the golden age of comics, where you saw Batman and Superman, and they really, when they were drawn on the page, were more cartoony than realistic. And I think that's what they were going for. Kind of the innocence of that age.
Now, I'm assuming that the original comics series would take longer to get through and probably went into more detail in some aspects. But watching it without having ever seen the comic, I felt like now. Well, and this is going to sound kind of funny from the creator of Spider-Hag, but it just felt like there were too many plot elements.
Oh, really?
Because we got these guys in the Korean War, and we've got the Martian, and we've got the Center, and we've got Wonder Woman over here, and it just felt like, okay, we got to keep track of all these different things that are going on. It all does come together.
Well, but isn't that kind of the nature of like a team book? We start out with not having a team, and then you have to find some way to pull them all in together.
I guess. Well, and it wasn't clear to me at the beginning that we were seeing sort of the origins of Green Lantern and Martian Manhunter. So I wasn't sure if these people were like potential threats to the Justice League or what their role was in it. So looking back at it, at the whole thing now, I can see, okay, these were Justice League members and how they were coming together, but it wasn't. I didn't know that at the beginning.
Yeah, I think this is definitely angled towards more of a person who's familiar with the Justice League.
Absolutely.
Whether that's the animated series or the comic book form. I didn't read the Justice League very much when I was younger, but I read it a little bit because there was some good art in the 90s and late 80s. So I picked it up every once in a while. And then watching this, contrary to what your thoughts were on it, it really deepened my appreciation for the characters that were involved in the Justice League, like the Green Lantern in particular. I know lots of people who were fans of the Green Lantern, but I never really thought of it as the Green Lantern as a character that I really identified with until I saw this movie. Martian Manhunter I always thought was really cool because he could shape change and he had almost all the powers of Superman, almost. But he seemed like a deeper character than Superman. Superman is the Boy Scout. That's my perspective on him.
Oh,
I tend to drift towards Batman more than Superman.
Why did Wonder Woman call Superman Kal?
Kal-El? You don't...
Kal-El?
That's his alien name?
Alien name, okay. Yeah, just like I couldn't remember what his original name was.
It's Calvin.
Calvin.
No, it's Kal-El.
Calvin Superman.
Yeah, that's the if you remember the original Superman movies when Marlon Brando sends Superman off, he calls him Kal-El. Okay. That's Superman's original name. That's his real name.
So, but yeah, I mean, this was definitely for fanboys more than for a general audience.
Well, it's PG-13 too, so it isn't really angled towards kids.
Right.
But there are a lot of adults and adolescents that have been watching the Justice League, the animated series, on, I think it's on the Cartoon Network or maybe another network. So, like the development of the team, and I really like the development of Martian Manhunter. And the thought process they put in behind the characters themselves. Like, kind of the insecurity of Flash.
Yeah.
And the bravado, I guess you would say, of the Green Lantern, as well as the feeling of being lost with Martian Manhunter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well,
Really
the Flash
drives.
and Green Lantern and Martian Manhunter storylines were fairly compelling. I could say that.
I'm kind of glad that they had Superman step out for a while.
Yeah, I felt like,
There's a
I mean, we
spoiler.
all know he's not dead, but yeah, I felt like maybe he was removed from the action to make it a little bit more of a challenge for the other characters.
Yeah, and plus he's the obvious leader, you know.
Hmm.
So when you have the obvious leader step out, you got to have somebody else step in, or the other team members fill in where that leader left off. And with Superman being so ridiculously powerful,
Hmm.
it's I think of the temptation there is to let just Superman handle everything, or even Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman's pretty close to being just as powerful as Superman,
Hmm.
but you got to leave something for the other members of the team to do.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, it gave Green Lantern and Flash really a chance to shine.
Right. I think
Um,
a lot of the decisions that they made on the, I don't think it was really for the animation as much as it was for the book, but the decisions they made for the time period, for the story they wanted to tell, and how that all kind of tied together with the characters at the time,
hmm.
I think it was really kind of smart because with the Kennedy era and the space race, as well as the nuclear weapons race, and
Hmm.
kind of like the fear and the prejudice that was going on at that time,
Yeah.
I think it was interesting to see how the animated film kind of played with all those aspects,
Hmm.
and I'm really interested in seeing what the book does with all of it.
Yeah. Except speaking of Kennedy, what really bugged me.
Oh,
So at the end of the story, they show a newspaper that that they've beaten the center and what all, and the date on the newspaper is like July 1960, and then they show them getting medals from President Kennedy, who was not president yet in July 1960. He was elected in November and became president in 61. Eisenhower was still president in 1960.
so they showed the paper first,
Uh huh. And so what? Then they
but
get the
wouldn't they
medals
get?
like 6 months later after
Wouldn't they?
Kennedy. What? I'm sorry.
Wouldn't they?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I guess the Super Bowl team doesn't usually visit the White House till months later. I don't know, but
Well, it's not. I mean, I would look at it more of as a military thing than a professional sports team, because with the military, what it normally happens if you have to write the commendation, and then wait for it to get approved before anybody can be awarded a medal.
mm,
And if it's a real medal that comes from the president, it has to be approved by Congress, a congressional medal of some sort. So that's going to take some time up until maybe the next president comes through. I don't know.
okay. Well, that makes sense, but it just felt like it felt to me like they were forgetting that Kennedy wasn't president yet. Then,
Okay.
um, anyway, um, anything else you wanted to say about this?
Yeah, you had mentioned that you didn't really read DC very much, but when I watched this, the reason why I had mentioned that I wanted to talk about it
Hmm.
is that I had always looked at DC as kind of being, with the exception of Batman, a bunch of really far-fetched characters that I couldn't identify with.
Hmm.
But after watching it, it made me kind of interested in reading some more DC titles.
Mm. Yeah, well, supposedly Green Lantern's been really good lately.
Has it?
Well, that's what I hear on iFanboy. I haven't read it myself, but and if I didn't have financial issues, I probably would try reading it. But I don't want to get dragged into another universe. Before I know it, I'd be buying 10 or 15 DC books. You know,
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's why I never got into the Ultimates either, because I just didn't want to be dragged into another universe.
I understand that. That's
Although
why I always kind of limited myself to Batman titles instead of any of the other character titles.
and then wouldn't you know, the Ultimate Spider-Man, everybody says is better than the regular Spider-Man. So then I was like, well, I should have just dropped the regular and bought Ultimate instead.
Right.
Eh. Have you been following like what's going on in Marvel at all?
I'm still stuck on like graphic novels and trade paperbacks.
Did you hear about the Spider-Man reboot?
No.
Oh, yeah. Mullally and I talked about this a few weeks ago, but yeah. So, geez, how do I even explain it? Um, Aunt May was dying, and Peter and Mary Jane made a deal with Mephisto, and in exchange for making Aunt May better, the timeline was changed so that they never got married. Um, which I guess basically Joe Quesada feels like. Hello?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Joe Quesada feels like the having them get married was a mistake, and it screwed up how made it harder for them to tell good stories about him. So
That's retarded.
I don't know. Yeah, it was pretty retarded. Although, and I almost say unfortunately, but since then, I mean, the stories that they're telling have been pretty decent.
Well, I
But
can understand being able to tell a better story, but
hmm
once you've like defined a character,
hmm
I think you kind of need to stick with that. And for Mary Jane and for Peter Parker to get married was a pretty big deal back then,
hmm
because I mean, even if you thought it was a bad idea, now
hmm
2020, looking back, the fact of the matter is you had spent so many years with Mary Jane and Peter Parker been just dating
hmm
that it wouldn't make sense for them to continue in the relationship
yeah, yeah.
unless they took it to the next step.
hmm
So I
Well,
think it's kind of cheating, you know?
yeah. Well, and they had a chance to break them up a few years ago. They were kind of separated for a while, and I don't know. I mean, Quesada was editor in chief then. I'm not sure why they didn't just break them up then. If they were gonna, it would have been a lot more realistic.
Yeah, and probably more relevant with people's relationships that have been following the comic book.
hmm But now
Because I'm
they've. Go ahead.
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, but now, I mean, they never really did anything with Peter revealing his secret identity. That's all been wiped out now.
Really?
Yeah, and Aunt May now doesn't know that he's Spider-Man, and he's back to using web shooter bracelets. I mean, they've just undone all kinds of things from the past 20 years.
I just don't understand that because you spend all this time like
I know.
you hear Marvel
I know.
on all their DVDs, on in the back of their books explaining how they have this developing mythos of these characters that exist over 30, 40, 50 years.
hmm
And how you have to remain consistent with that. And then all of a sudden you just have, okay, we'll just restart.
Yeah,
Do over.
it feels. I mean, supposedly time has gone by and the Civil War happened and everything, but I mean, if you read the story, it feels a lot like an early '80s Spider-Man story, like
Hmm.
pre-black costume Spider-Man is what it feels
I
like.
used to like the, now this is a DC thing, but they used to do like Elseworlds,
hmm
where for one, two, maybe three comics in a row, they would take a character and say, what if?
hmm
And I guess, Marvel used to have that title, What If,
hmm
where you could pull a character and take out that one critical moment in time and see where that character went afterwards.
hmm
And I think that's a cool idea to do for a limited basis, but I think it's really kind of wrong to do it with the entire title and let the title run on, unless you're saying it's an alternate universe or something like that. But still,
hmm
it's like Alien 3,
What happened
which
in
you
Alien
didn't
3?
see,
No, of course not.
probably. Alien 3, Sigourney Weaver's character died because she was hosting another queen of the aliens.
hmm
But in order for Alien 4 to occur, they had to have Sigourney Weaver back.
hmm
So they had to find some way of saying, well, that didn't necessarily happen. That maybe there was this other way that we could still have Sigourney Weaver around for the next Alien, which was that they had gotten her DNA and cloned her, which was, once again, kind of cheating.
hmm
So Sigourney Weaver had started over instead of having that same. I think her name was Wrigley. Was it Wrigley or Ridley? That one character come back.
hmm
They cheated by having a clone of that character. It seemed so soap opera,
Mm.
Instead of really having the character come back, we have somebody else that looks, talks, and kind of is her, but we're gonna start all over. We don't have to have all the story that kind of shut off all of our options, and we can still continue on with the story I want to tell instead of what was told before us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not progression. It's just kind of going back, doing it over or something.
Which I wish I could do in my real life.
Yeah, gee, yeah, I'd like to go.
Kirkham rebooted.
I'd like to erase some things that I did.
Yeah. Brandon rebooted. I would so be in Japan right now.
Okay, so we've still got one other book to talk about. Writing for Comics with Peter David, published by Impact. Brandon had read this first and recommended it to me, and I got it from Amazon.
And I read this a very long time ago, so you have to give me. I think I recommended it like almost a year and a half ago.
Well, I don't know if it's been that. You may have mentioned it then. I think you mentioned it again more recently. I got it a couple months ago.
Okay.
But yeah, it's a little bit skewed towards trying to get into the big two, and the things you need to keep in mind for writing for Marvel and DC. But it does have a lot of just kind of general writing advice also, and thinking about theme and conflict and 3-act story arc and that kind of thing. Which I found interesting because, when in writing Spider-Hag or anything else I've ever written that was fiction, I never really had any of that in mind consciously. I was just kind of writing what happened next. And of course, Spider-Hag is definitely much more than 3 acts. But
yeah, I think the thing that I really liked about this book was that it did. Not necessarily that it was looking at DC and Marvel, but that it looked at kind of the structure of the stories that you wanted to tell, and kind of the plot points and the character direction, all those kind of underlying things. That if you were just trying to tell a story, and you just spit the story out, you may not kind of understand the theory behind it. And this book really explains that theory that would help you write a successful story that could be one of those ongoing mythos story that you would take the character and continue on with, which I guess isn't so important anymore.
He touches a few times on a point that Mulele has sometimes brought up. Well, Mulele and Kumar, I guess, also. The decompressed storytelling.
Right.
And Peter David says a lot of people have looked at that as being laziness on the part of the writers, but he argues that it has more to do with the change in our culture and how we expect stories to be told, and a lot of writers maybe watch more movies than they do read books or comics, and so the comics tend to become more like movies in their pacing.
More of a cinematic.
Mm-hmm. And less dialogue, less narration. That's probably a big reason why narration and thought balloons, he mentions that, have dropped out of comics because you don't have them so much in movies. Although Bendis has been bringing thought balloons back in Mighty Avengers.
Right.
Sometimes it's irritating, but sometimes it's interesting.
I just stumbled across another passage in the book on page 115. Cinematic storytelling. It has become popular in recent years to reboot the origins of assorted characters and retell them with the current hot writers and artists at the helm. It's not as if this in and of itself is a particularly new development. Years ago, it was generally assumed that readers of comics at any given time were boys aged 8 to 12. The further assumption was that When a current generation of readers discovered girls, comic books would be left behind along with their bags of marbles and their baseball cards. The notion that readers would stick around into their teens and beyond that would have been considered ludicrous. Consequently, every few years, publishers would retell the origins of their heroes for the presumed new audience of readers who might be wondering how Bruce Wayne became Batman or how Superman could fly. The difference between those days and now is that the origins would be told within stories of 6 pages. Nowadays, however, those same origins can wind up taking 6 issues. Fans refer to this as decompressed storytelling, as if the story is just being expanded for the sake of expansion. It's not decompressed storytelling, it's cinematic storytelling, which is what you just said.
Yeah. Well, Lele pointed me to this website once. I'm not sure if I could find it again, but it compares like one page of Spider-Man from the 60s to one page of recent Spider-Man, and they count like how many words there are in the page. And of course, the 60s Spider-Man is like words all over the place, all kinds of narration and long dialogue, and the current Spider-Man has much, much less. And it's just a few moments in time passing on one page rather than half a day.
Right.
But although I think that site again is trying to say that it's a matter of laziness, but yeah, I don't think that's what it is. And I don't think anyone would want to see. I mean, I don't know that modern readers want to see comics done like they were in the 60s with that much writing on the page. I
don't even like to see the comic writing that was done in the 1980s anymore. Because even that has a whole lot of dialogue for a single panel. As far as retelling the same story or rebooting, I don't think in the ages past they told a different story like they're doing now, where rebooting has taken on a whole different meaning.
Yeah, it's not like retelling; it's rewriting.
We change everything about the character. Where what they used to do is kind of just refresh our memory of what occurred during that period of time.
Yeah.
And I know certain books that I really like the Spider-Man Blue and Daredevil Yellow and Hulk Gray. Those are simply retelling of the story, but in a decompressed format. I like that better than the originally how they told the same story. Because it goes much more into the character and what's driving the character to make certain decisions that make them ultimately the hero that they become. I think it's a more sophisticated way in some senses of telling the same story instead of spoon-feeding the reader and telling them, okay, this is all the dialogue, this is all the narration and the thought balloons, everything that's going in with the story, this is why they did what they did. You leave it a little bit open for the reader's interpretation of the character and identifying with that character to be able to make those same decisions in their mind and understand where the character is coming from with the current trend to decompress some of the storytelling. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's what I think.
Okay.
At least right now.
Tune in next time to see how Brandon has changed his mind. No.
Right. We have talked about decompressed storytelling before, and sometimes it does irritate me. But
yeah, well, there was a period where they decompressed it a little bit too much. Well, but part of the thing was that they were doing a lot of like spreads, and so it would be like 10 minutes went by in one issue, and it was beautiful art, but there wasn't very much story, and they've
right.
kind of stepped away from that a little bit lately. So there's a decent amount of story in each issue again. But
the story that I recall is one with the Quicksilver when he had lost his powers, and it seemed like there was a whole lot of nothing going on. While we saw a lot of beautiful panels, but there wasn't really any progression in the story.
What I think of is the first couple issues of New Avengers.
I think that's what was it. New Avengers that I was talking about.
I don't recall that Quicksilver was in that.
What was the story where he lost his powers?
Um, House of M, or just after
Yeah,
that,
that's what it was.
just
House of M. It was House of M. You
yeah,
had loaned me.
yeah, and then there was the Son of M miniseries just after that that was about Quicksilver. But
But I think I had the same problems with the New Avengers too.
mm, I remember when we first started the podcast, we talked about New Avengers.
Right. Yeah, I think it's kind of a balance, just like anything.
Mm-hmm.
You can you can tell the reader too much on one end, or you can decompress it too much and leave it all to the visual
Mm-hmm.
on the other end. But really, to be effective, you've got to be somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, and then another aspect of that is that he shows, like in '60s comics, how they would put in so much dialogue that there was no way that just the action in that panel could have happened in the time that it took to say all of that.
Right.
You know, just in the space of Spider-Man punching Scorpion one time, he's said several sentences. So the reader just has to assume that more happened during that time than what you're actually seeing in the panel, which works okay as storytelling. But he says, whatever you're going to do, stick with that pacing and don't do it decompressed one time and 60 style compressed the next time. Within the same story.
Because it makes it hard to read.
Well, it just makes it inconsistent, yeah, and it kind of would throw the reader off. Once you started reading a series, you kind of have some expectations for it, and if you vary from that too much in your pacing or whatever, it's kind of hard to follow.
Because I can understand as far as dialogue is concerned, but visual storytelling elements, I think it could be effective if during the normal time where there's nothing really going on, you tell a story that's more packed with dialogue and it moves along quicker. Then when you get to the more intense action-packed moments, that's when you would slow down the panel to panel, kind of like in films. Every once in a while, when it comes to one of those moments where there's a whole lot of action occurring all at one time, they'll actually slow down the time.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, you could play with that effectively depending on what's happening in the story.
But I think if you're including dialogue, though, that would contradict the whole idea of slowing down the timeline itself, because you're not going to talk any faster or slower. Well, you would talk slower if you slowed down time, but you wouldn't talk any faster. Mm-hmm. So I can see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Was there anything else that you wanted to say about the book? The Writing for Comics with Peter David?
Not
you think it was useful?
It was useful, yeah. I'd like to read it again when I have time to actually write something.
I think it's really a beginner's guide.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've read some other books that are far more in depth about writing for comics than this is.
Mm-hmm.
But as an overall overview, I think I would recommend it. Probably I'd give it a 9.
Sure.
What about you?
Yeah, probably 9 is good.
Depending on the audience, of course.
Yeah, it might be somewhat less useful if you're writing for Top Shelf, but. This is Tim again. I want to say thanks to our sponsor, ComicsNow.com, where I subscribe to my comics at 35% off. Mentioned that our theme song is performed by Firewater. And don't forget that if you're doing a comic and you'd like some feedback on it, go ahead and send it to us and we can critique it on the show. The email address is podcast@globalcomics.net. Next week, what is a Creative Commons copyright, and do you want one for your comic? Mullally and both Patricks will be here for a great discussion on that. So till then, thanks for listening. This is Tim. See you next week on Deconstructing Comics.